by painting of that type. It's a good example of what I want to say. A painting by, the point there should be read A, Alexander Young Jackson, and Quebec Village. And I was intrigued because you do have a series of these pictures where these good Anglophone Protestant are looking, I would say, at us, old Catholic, you know, and seeing, I would say, like religion of the other, how they see, how they perceive the other side. I'm not myself a very good Catholic. I marry a Jew, and so I consider myself a little bit detached from all this. But nevertheless, I thought the problem is interesting in terms of la perception de l'autre, if you want, how the other is perceived. And if you look at a picture like this, which is a good example of that, the first thing that struck me, it is that the foreground is empty and big. You have all this white snow, just little kids on the side that are playing there, and then you see a row of houses, and finally in the back you see the church. It's really, I would say, a look at distance, with a distance. It's not, you are not inside the church, you are not assisting to any church event. In the contrary, you see that in this village, whatever Quebec village it was, we have some hypotheses about the subject matter. I will go to this after. But first, what struck me is this kind of distance, this kind of not as if you were on a kind of very foreign ground there. You don't know too much what it is exactly. And in fact, of all the artists of the group of 7, Jackson is the more linked to Quebec in a way. And he knew Montreal, of course, he was born there, and he was more at ease, if you want. But nevertheless, he had this kind of distant view. And I think we can demonstrate that the church that he was depicting there was, in fact, St. George in Kakuna. I don't know if you know where Kakuna is. It's on the south shore of the St. Lawrence in the region, let's say, of Rivière-du-Loup, more or less, in that region. And so it's, you have a photo of the facade of the church, and if you compare with the picture of Jackson, you will see that it's probably exactly there. So that means it's one of the first trips that he made in 1921, really in deep Quebec, I would say. He began by the South Shore and stopped at different little villages like this and come back with sketches and then finally made this little painting. Other example of the same type of approach with other painter, let's say with Albert Henry Robinson, like here, the Church of Long Point. So this is somewhere on the Montreal Island, so it's not too far. But again, you see this forbidding structure of this huge church that now, as you know, are transformed in condominium and everything. I don't know what they will do with all this, but they have a lot of problems. And he put that, again, also in the back of his picture. And he got interested about what was in the foreground, like these the horses with the little carriage and everything. And also the old houses, I would say, will fit with this type of landscape. Another example will be this Saint-Joseph, you see, where not only you have a church, but you have big spires, you have many of them, always in the back, always the foreground, empty like this, always the same type of construction. Robinson was a painter that Jackson mentioned in his book, A Painter Country, where Jackson described a little bit of his life and his interest and all that, and he speaks always of Robinson as a true pea souper. And a guy who could speak French with a French Canadian as a good intermediary for him with the other community. So it's a painter that he admired. Okay, so I started with this type of picture, that there's many of them, and I asked myself, okay, this is very nice. This is the Protestant looking at the Catholic. Do we have the opposite? Do we have Catholic painters let's say, we will pretend to be Catholic or whatever, or from Francophone, try to represent the religion of the other. And in a way, you have it in literature, I thought of Thériault, for instance, writing a book about a young religious Jew, very orthodox. In a book, it's called Aaron. And, well, this was an attempt, let's see, to describe the other. You think of Gabrielle Roy also, who have La Petite Poule d'Eau, where she speaks of the Manitoba community there, where you get many culture involved, natives, French-Canadian, Anglo-Canadian, and Métis and all that. And, but when you think of painting, there's none. I don't think we can quote a French-Canadian painter who have tried to represent, I don't know, a temple or a synagogue or things like that, as if it was of no interest for them. But there is, I think, a specific reason for that. In Catholicism, you have, I think I've mentioned it many times, but you have this distinction between the here and the beyond. And between this world and the other world. And then to make them connect together, there's always importance given to the symbolic. What I mean by that is basically all the rituals, all the hierarchy. You don't communicate with God directly. You communicate with God through a hierarchy. You have your priest, you have your bishop, and you have your pope, all this in between you and God. The same with ritual. You don't just open the Bible and pray. No. You go to church, you have Mass, you have confession, you have all the sacraments and all that. You remember with the Osias Leduc, I give you the full list. And so you have a lot of symbolic in that sense. And the symbolic is the common ground where the world of beyond and the world of here meet, in a way. And it's so true that in the Catholic point of view, there is certain action who are done here, I would say, and are homologated in the beyond. For instance, a marriage done in church, it's a marriage recognized by God himself. That's why it's so difficult to divorce. It is like defined for forever, since it has this kind of dimension of eternity. The same, if you confess your sin at confession, well, you feel very good after because God himself forgive you. But so that means that certain action in Catholicism have this kind of aura or this kind of power, if you want, and the rest is more or less indifferent. When you think of Protestantism, I would say that what they wanted to do is to eliminate the symbolic, to make, not to make God a kind of entity that you meet through the symbol, but directly. Yeah? And then one of the consequences of that, all these so-called ritual and what I was calling the common ground between, let's see, the beyond and here, is suspected. It's no more good. It's idolatry, or at worst, it's the Antichrist himself. If you think of the way Luther, for instance, speaks of the Pope, he saw it as the Antichrist because he was kind of an intermediary that was not necessary. It's as if we wanted to reactivate the notion of God as real, not as symbolic, like to eliminate the symbol. And in fact, if you think now in terms of a painter who is interested in visual, well, the symbol is very important. This is something to see. This is something to be interested in. And this real, this God with whom you communicate directly without any intermediary, well, you cannot see it. And then I think you have the explanation why this phenomenon is one-sided, if you want. It's Protestant or Anglophone painters who were interested in manifestation of Catholic religion in Quebec. To show you more in detail this type of phenomenon, I thought of starting by a less known work of Jackson, but which is, let's say, interesting in terms, not so much in the style and all that. It's a series of illustrations that he made for a book that was published first in French, and it was called Chez Nous. And the translation read, Our Old Quebec House. It was written by a man who's called Adjutant Rivard, Adjutant Rivard was a politician and all that, but he was also very interested in the old French language. I would say the root of the joual, if you want. And he was interested in this, and he wrote this little book with a kind of book of souvenirs of his childhood, of a little scene, I would say, that describes certain aspect of what he thought was important chez nous, in the French-Canadian culture. And the book is translated in English, and it's published by Macmillan, so I get in Toronto, and they are looking for some illustration to make it more interesting, and they think of Jackson. He accepted, he find it interesting, but then when you compare the picture of Jackson and the text of Rivard, you see immediately the difference. For instance, this view that you have here, which is very close to painting done by Jackson like this early spring in Quebec. If you think of the composition, it's a little bit the same thing. It's kind of snowy banks like this going one behind the others up to infinity with an horizon relatively high, some construction in the foreground. So you would say, okay, this is a very typical image that you could expect from Jackson if you ask him to make a drawing, you see, to illustrate a book. But when you read the text of Rivard, accompanying this picture in particular, there's religious meaning all the time. Rivard is always taking advantage of every little chapter to speak about how pious our ancestors were and things like that. For instance, he mentioned about this picture, a garden. I was looking for it. I don't see it. I don't know where it is. But for Rivard, this garden was very important because he imagined a scene in which a grandfather is explaining to his grandchild not to pick up flowers, and you will see why. He says, leave the rose growing. The good God made the earth for his praise, and adorn it that it should fitly praise him. What is a flower but the earth praying, and what the scent of it but incense? Do not rob the earth, my children, of his beauteous grab and its prayers. So suddenly, this is a good example also of this kind of attitude, of symbolic attitude. You see nature and you transform it as a sign of something else. And of course, nothing of that appear in the image of Jackson, not even from far. And then, of course, in Saturday night, the old lady, the grandmother, cut the flowers to bring them to the church. So the kid says, well, what is this, grandfather? How come that our grandma can do it and you forbid us to do it? So here is his answer. This is well, my grandchildren, for the flowers belong to the earth, but both the flower and the earth belongs to God. So no problem. You can, if you bring them to church, there's no problem. And if you, there's 11 of these pictures. I will not show you all of them because it will become boring because it's always the same type of attitude. If you compare the picture of Jackson and the text of Rivard, you have always this kind of discrepancy, as if Jackson, again, was reticent to go too deep in this. And he leaves the text to itself, which is beautifully translated and all that, so there's no problem. But he hesitated to go too far. But there's one occasion where he could not avoid it, and it is this, with this picture, where there is a roadside cross, like you see in the country, in Quebec, in many places. There's less and less. There's even one on Jean Talon Street. I don't know if it's still there, but it was there for a long, long time. Nobody dared to remove it. And he was, in this chapter of Rivard's book, he could not avoid it because the whole story turns around the attitude of people from the city and people from the country when they cross in front of a cross like this. And the text of Rivard says how scandalized was the peasant. You see, you have two people here in this little carriage in the background, and one of them is from the city, and the other, of course, is the country. And when he passed in front of the cross, of course, he remove his hat, or he do some demonstration, or a sign of the cross, or whatever. And of course, the man of the city didn't even notice it, and so he's very scandalized by his attitude. And here's what he says. He says, a little further on, and of course, the whole chapter is about this. So I guess there, poor Jackson could not avoid it. You know, he had to he had to illustrate it. A little further on there, stood by the roadside a lofty wooden cross, one of those crosses raised in pious thought by the faithful to invite a blessing on our countrysides. Women make the sign of the cross. Men bears their head, and when they go by, Uncle Jean reverently lifteth his hat, but as well as he could discover out of the tail of his eyes, the stranger made no gesture. You see the opposition, and it goes. So indeed, you could find in some drawings of Jackson a relative interest to that. You see, in this one, well, they were terse, but they were precise. You see, they gave all the instrument to remove the nails. So when Jesus was on the cross, after when they removed him, they needed a plier, I guess, and so they put the pliers. And here is also a little jar where you have the vinegar. Like he was supposed to be given vinegar before his death, and so they put it there also. This I don't know exactly, and the harrow and all that. So you have the fameuse lance. This is when the Christ was on the cross, one of the soldiers gave him a blow with it. So and I think he was intrigued by that, and he made some drawings like this during his trips of these things. But it's a theme, in fact, that you will find also in others type of picture with a very different meaning. This is Clarence Gagnon. There's no relationship with me. The Gagnon is as numerous as the sand of the earth, as you know. It's written in the Bible. We occupied 6 pages in the telephone book, so I have nothing to do with him. But Clarence Gagnon made this La Croix du Chemin à l'automne, and what he did, he took a little bit the same subject than Jackson, and he put it in the foreground, and what you see in the background is Baie Saint-Paul, where Gagnon used to have his house there and work a lot in that region. Baie Saint-Paul is a village situated in Charlevoix-Comté, if you want, on the North Shore this time, and after Quebec. So you go to Quebec City and you go further, about, I don't remember how many miles, but quite let's say 1 hour and a half or something in car, and then you arrive to Baie Saint-Paul. And there you have typically regionalist painter of Quebec, a francophone, who see the scene in a very different way. The same scene could be seen as interesting from outside, if you want, and the same scene could be seen also from expression of a certain identity. Like it's a construction, and it's also a valorization of this land, of this part of the land, with its symbols that is suggested here. And I think one of the devices that you see often in Clarence Gagnon, it is to put the foreground in kind of, I would say, in shadow, like you see here, and put the background very illuminated, as if the sun is in the background, but you are in the shadow. And this, in a way, it's a device to make you enter in the picture. You are attracted to the background, and so he wants to create a kind of participation with the onlooker when he looks at a scene like that. And here again, to make a counterproof, here again, the same theme, done this time by Sarah Robertson, who see it from far also. Not at all this kind of engaging system that you have in Clarence Gagnon. You are outside, you have this foreground, and you have Marie-Louise and Joseph speaking together in front of the cross. Like, again, it's a more exterior type of approach. It's not the approach of Gagnon, who I think is more intimate in a way. That doesn't mean, be careful, that we should conclude that the Gagnon picture is better or the Jackson picture is worse. You don't make painting with good intention only. No? You need something else. And so you could have, even with somebody who is looking from afar and is not too much compromised with the subject, could make a more interesting painting than somebody who think that this is the good occasion to express my nationalism and how my love of the land and things like that. You understand that we don't make painting only with ideas or with emotion. We need some skill and something else. So to come back to my opposition between these illustrations of Jackson and the book of Rivard, we could say my main problem was how to explain, nevertheless, the interest of a man like Jackson to illustrate a book like this. He could have said, oh no, this is really too bad, it's too corny, I don't want to do that. But in the contrary, he says he was interested in. And one explanation you could have, it is that maybe he felt that this type of culture have a certain pittoresque, if you want, and was also threatened to disappear. You have very often this type of discourse expressed at the time. When people look at these things and they say, okay, it's too bad that it's vanishing, and we should do something for it. Again, this Clarence Gagnon picture I want to show you, which is very famous. You must have received it with the Christmas card every year by somebody, or he goes to hear the lecture of Monsieur Gagnon. I will send him that. It's exactly what he needs. And okay, and this idea of let's say, representing an old village and as if to save the savor of what it was, like, you know, Saint-Urbain is in Charlevoix country. It's exactly the same thing. And here I would quote you just a little passage from Painter's Country, from Jackson, and you will see, while Robinson, the one I showed you in the beginning, and I, in our painting, accepted all the contemporary types of building, which made the whole Quebec village a jumble. You remember in the picture of Robinson that I showed you at the beginning, there was, for instance, a telephone post in the foreground. This is what he means. He says, we didn't choose. We represent the things like they are. But he says, Gagnon, steeped in the tradition of Quebec, in his composition will replace the new wooden boxes with whole houses, of which he made many studies. He told the farmers around Baie-Saint-Paul that the Quebec government was going to pay them to preserve their old house and barns. It was not true, but it should have been, says Jackson. Of course, you know, if you expect too much of the government. Anyway, Gagnon had a project for creating a Canadian village near Montreal by buying up old houses, reconstructing them, and furnishing them with everything made in Quebec. It was a great idea, says Jackson, and should be carried on. This is true. Gagnon wanted to buy houses, and he wanted, instead of the Chalet de la Montagne that you have now, he wanted to create a pseudo-Quebec village there. The plan exists. If ever you want to see it, it's the CAA, the Centre d'Architecture. They have it. And it was really going far. He wanted to have also a little brook there with Indians, you see, with a canoe and things like that. A kind of reconstruction where tourists could come and live for a few minutes in a village like the one you see. But where, of course, like Jackson says, all the bad taste houses are replaced by old one, and which is in fact imaginary. It looks real, this thing, but if you go to Saint-Urbain today, you will not find, of course, the village as it is now. And even then, if you look carefully at this picture, trying to imagine where the painter could be to see the village that way. Is he on the ground or is he above? And I think, in fact, he's above. He's like almost like a bird looking from. So I thought also that the mountains there are a little bit exaggerated for the Laurentide, but maybe it's true in Charlevoix. They are a little bit bigger than here. But anyway, just to say that these images are constructed. They are not just painted, they just looked at as they are. They are constructed, but also with this kind of nostalgia, and which is shared also by Jackson when he says, I made painting of great many barns, of which the one at the Art Gallery of Toronto, this one, is the best known. These barns disappeared shortly after I made the painting. So there is expression of this nostalgia all the time as one of the explanations, if you want, of the interest of this Anglophone painter to save, if you want, some souvenir of this culture. But I don't think it's the ultimate answer. To go a little bit further in my reasoning, let's say I want to introduce, since we have Holgate now on the walls, another project which is very similar to the one of Jackson, also illustration of book, but now done by Holgate. And it's, I would say, more or less the same type of project. Now the book was written by a man who's called Georges Bouchard. Instead of adjutant Rivard, we are in the harm, what I can do. And it was called, of course, Vieilles choses et vieilles gens, old people and old things, and again translated into English, and they wanted to have illustration done this time by Edwin Oldgate. And again, like Jackson, instead of saying why I should do that, he got interested, and he made also a series of pictures for that. And the same thing, if you confront these pictures with a text now of Bouchard, you will see, again, the same type of opposition between two visions. For instance, this one, who is called the Plowman, if you want, it corresponds to a chapter in the book of Bouchard. It's called like this, and where he speaks of, also, I would say it's almost a very typical French-Canadian nationalist text, you will see. He says, plowing is the point of close contact with the herd. Does not the furrow in Canada mark the most authentic and incontestable taking possession of the land, the most intimate marriage of a people to the soil? What the sword had conquered and defended, the plow preserves and fructifies. The French race in America owes its development mainly to the plow, blessed by the cross and defended by the sword. My God. You have the three symbols there, the cross, the sword, and the plow, all together. And it's a very, very nationalist type of discourse, if you want. If you look at the picture of Oldgate after that, because this is the illustration of this chapter where this is written, there's not even a spire of church in the background. There's no, and certainly no Indian hidden in the forest, that you have to attack. No, he took, I would say, an interest in the way, the gesture, let's see, of these men. One detail within the text also is the idea that the father is accompanied by his son. So he kept this idea, but he removed all the other allusion to this type of staunch nationalism that you will have in Quebec at the time. Just another example. This is where you go closer to the religious subject. What it is, he called it the crier. The crier is, it doesn't exist anymore, this thing, but I remember in my childhood, we saw that. In the country, not in the city. It was done anymore. After the high mass, you go out, and sometimes you go during the sermon also, but anyway, you go out, and then you have this little construction that you see here, where a big man, habitually, with a good voice, come there, and make announcement will be interesting for the community. For instance, it could be Joe Fafar have a big cows now and he want to sell it, and people will bid, say, will do. There will be the crier, and also he will say, well, Monsieur Garot, you should also finish your road in front of your house because it's not nice. All the others of the parish have done it, and you didn't do it. And also, finally, you see, he was collecting money for saying mass for saving the poor souls who are in purgatory. As you know, there's 3 stages. You could be in heaven, so if you are very good, or you could be in hell. But if you are like all of us, I would say, you go to purgatory. And then, for a while, you get a little bit cooked, and finally, they send you to well. And so, one way to finish fast with this, it was to pay masses. And he was collecting for that also. So this was more or less his role. And of course, this is, I would say, a little bit amusing and all that. And you see the man in the corner there is with a big smile. And in the background, you have a little bit of religious symbol. The fact that you don't see the church here, the church is in our back, I would say. It's as if we get out of it, and it's here somewhere, and we see what we see in front of us is just this little construction in which the crier is trying to sell his thing. You have the cemetery in the back, and maybe the three stumps like this, who could be an evocation of the Calvary, if you want, like but maybe then I put too much. I think also that the little clouds on the top have something of that you will expect from a religious picture, but it's as far as it can go. He took only one aspect of the thing. This crier, or what we call la crier du village, was also a theme that was that you will find in, for instance, again with Clarence Gagnon. Here it's you see it with the same type of system. The foreground is in shadow, and the background is very illuminated. But here you see the crier is in front of the church. They just go out of the church, and all the men are there waiting, some of them with their money, waiting that what he have to say and listening to this announcement. It is as if, again, the same type of structure that we see in the old gate picture. We are out of the church. We are on the, I would say, the, comment est-ce qu'on appelle ça, le perron, là, just the stage there, and he's about to say. But what struck me here, you don't have the comic dimension that you have in Old Gate. Nobody smiled there. It's serious, the crier here. It will be in Piribonka. This is an illustration of Maria Chapdelaine. So it's a village of settlers and all that with very hard life. So it will be a little bit tough. Another man who have treated also the same subject is Bieler. Bieler is a Swiss-born artist that live in Canada, but in Switzerland, he was interested by peasant culture there, and he was happy to find a little bit the same type of attitude. But here you see the point of view is opposite. You see the church, and you see the people coming out of it, and what we don't see is the man who is make la crier, but it's exactly the same type of situation that we have before. So these choices are never made completely abstractly, and I would say you could attach them to a tradition of interest in primitivism, more generally. You have this in Europe, of course, much before that we did, but if you get interested in primitivism, in primitive culture, you get to deal with some religious aspect of this culture, as if you cannot escape this. It's so part of their life that if you want to treat it properly, you have to suggest it in a certain way. Even if you do it very discreetly, like Jackson with one drawing, and also Holgate only with kind of par la bande, like this type of drawing. But here, you see, it's a good opposition. You will see exactly which type of problem this type of picture was asking. Daniel Bouvray, who was, I would say, a very academic painter, very popular in his days, exhibiting in the Salon in Paris all the time and attracting a lot of people, was representing the Breton population, you see, at a ceremony that you call les pardons. Le pardon was, again, something that you buy, it's indulgence. That you buy to save your soul and all that. By giving some money, you were after saved. And let's see, the very traditionalist onlooker saw in the painting of Daniel Bouvray a kind of expression of their faith. They said, wow, look at that, all these people really are real believers. We look at their face and they seem very intense and very, exactly the opposite of L'Enterrement à Ornans of Courbet. You remember this big painting where everybody is yawning and looking around and they're being more stiff by what's happening, and they are digging a tomb, you know, incredible. No, there in Daniel Bouvray, there's a kind of dignity, and he tried to express that. And even if he was himself an atheist, if you want, an unbeliever, this picture would have been seen as a kind of folklore, a kind of exploration of a certain aspect of a primitive culture. And so he was praised by the traditionalists and by the people who were more, let's say, less interested in religion. With Gauguin, of course, with the same type of intention than Dagnon Bouvray, like with this vision after the sermon, where apparently the sermon was about the fight of the angel with Jacob, and Gauguin, who have all the, let's say, the chutzpah that you can imagine, put himself here in a corner as the priest, and he's looking, of course, to this girl here that he fall in love with, who was the sister of Émile Bernard. Well, this is the little story behind this, but what he wanted to do, it's a picture in which not only we will represent the fate of these primitive people, of the Breton people, but also we will do it in a style that will be primitive too. That's why, for instance, he painted the grass in red like this to make it supernatural, if you want, as if like in a, I would say, almost like a Byzantine icon, in which the background is in gold, for instance, to show that you are not in the normal world, you are in something else. And of course, then the traditionalist critics, let's say, rejected the painting of Gauguin, not because of the subject matter, but because of the style. You understand that was the big issue then. And poor Gauguin tried to sell this painting to churches. Of course, the vicar says, it's une horreur, fichez-moi le camp. He didn't want to see him, of course, anymore. And he doesn't understand why they were so surprised. This is another example of this illustration of Holgate for the book of Bouchard, which now it's not on a religious subject, but it's like what I was telling you about the previous with Jackson and Rivard. It is, if you read the text, it ends up with a kind of an explanation that why we put horseshoes on barns. And it's to protect them against the devil, of course, because the devil is supposed to have hoof. And he danced very well also. You have a lot of quality like this that you should be warned about. And it ended up by saying, I hope that the devil of the industry will not transform our countryside. So again, it's a pretext to get to this type of thing. And maybe where it's more striking, it is one of the rare pictures where they treat not so much, I would say, men type of work, but women. And here is the teacher. And here's the Holgate picture that I want to confront to another illustration with the same subject matter, more or less, but you would see with a completely different attitude. Here the teachers, the she teachers who was here, have one of her students nearby, and this student is saying something to the rest of the class. So you could imagine it's a kind of a system in which you have knowledge in the teacher who is transmitted to the student who can now transmit it himself to the others. When you go to this illustration of Franchère, for Les Rapaillages, alors this is a book, if I find the two others a little bit too much to the right and nationalist, this is the epitome of it. Chanoine Groux is not an admiration of mine, but anyway. We have a metro station with him, it's enough. I don't want to praise him too much. But in his book, he have les rapaillages, which means something like whole things that you want to save. C'est rapailler, ça veut dire to save, to keep. For an old chair, for instance, you fix it a little bit to keep it. And so you want to suggest old custom and things. And here it's la visite du principal. Alors the principal is come, and of course the school teacher is put aside. She cannot say a word. She's like this, and she hopes that the kids will behave. The parents are there too, and look at the hierarchy. Okay, you have the cross first on the ceiling. You have the principal, who looks a little bit like an idiot, but anyway, and then you have the teacher and the parents in the back. The poor kids are all like this. I understand they have so much authority above them. They are not very free there. See? So when you oppose, and this is of course two worlds, in which one is to disseminate knowledge and the other it's really to impose it and to define it if you want. And then when I see, if now with this example in head and the Jackson example, I go back to my question of what is exactly was attracting these Anglophone painters to this type of subject, even if they treated it with a certain freedom and all that. I think we have to go to, I says, okay, maybe because they were interested to save something of the past. Huh? They saw that these custom and usage were disappearing, and they wanted to fix it on paper or in imagery. But I think there's another reason also. And when the book of Illustrated by Holgate was published, there's a critic who's called Morgan Powell, who's one of the good critics in Toronto, wrote about the folkloric aspect of this picture of Holgate. And I think this is a key word, the folklore there, the interest in folklore. And it's a key word because it really makes us understand the difference between the point of view, let's say, of Abbé Groux, that Chanoine Groux, I want to show it to you once in your lifetime. Now he's in the cemetery and talking about, I don't know which great French-Canadian who's dead. But the Chanoine Groux have an approach, I would say, of the problem of, let's say, of peasant life and all that, which is quite typical of the philosopher that came to my mind. Is Herder. Is a German philosopher that was in reaction against the Enlightenment. And in short, what was the issue is this. During the Enlightenment, the definition of a society was done by what we can call a social contract, meaning that adults go together and come and decide which kind of society they will want. And Herder and the romantic German philosopher that followed them says this is wrong. It's not the way a society is done. A society, you are born in it. You cannot decide what it is. The language you receive, you don't invent it. The faith you receive also, the usage of your family, you have no control on this. And the attachment to the land is part of this. So as if there was, at the beginning of any society, a big amount of irrationality that you cannot really control, that you are born in. This is exactly, of course, the type of reasoning that you will find in Chanoine Groux and all the nationalists in Quebec. They will say exactly that. That's why we want a special society. We want to be separated from the rest. We cannot control that. We are born with it, okay? And of course, what we are suggesting with federalism is let's sit together and try to work out a system in which everybody was happy. More a contrat social, like Rousseau a little bit. You understand that this is the issue. But what is paradoxical here, it is that the attitude, the interest in folklore came from these philosophers of the Herder type. It is, sociology is born when we begin to get interested in phenomenon we could call maybe a collective unconscious. Language, how it's developed, usage, say transmitted like this without myth and things. All the team that of social science, all the teams that are interested by social science on a rational way are in fact not so far from the interests of the nationalists. You have a kind of bizarre circle there where on one hand you have a very, I would say, emotional type of involvement with these values, and another one very detached, very objective, where we study folklore. But in fact, they agree more or less. They are dealing with the same phenomenon. With a definition of a society who doesn't go through reason, who doesn't go through, but is interested in more what I would call the collective unconscious, without any allusion to Carl Jung in a more sociological way. And there was one man who will incarnate exactly this type of attitude among the French Canadians, and it was Marius Barbeau. I was very struck when I read this guy. This guy, at first, I said, oh my God, this is one of the worst traditionalists I ever read. Speak only of les vieilles choses. We have to save everything, and we have to collect everything that is disappearing and all that. But he's also a folklorist. He's also a scientist in a way. and he's French-Canadian, and he works in Ottawa. He was a fantastic link between, let's say, both the two communities and also between the two attitudes, the nationalist attitude. For instance, one of his books where it was called Quebec, where whole France is lingering, or lingering, comment est-ce qu'on dit? No, lingering, or something like that. He says, this book is dedicated to Duplessis. Oh my God. The first page, to Maurice Duplessis, Premier Ministre de la Province, blah, 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 blah. I said, wow, this is really not my hero. But on the other hand, he is also a folklorist. He's interested scientifically in all these old usage and all that. He was a fantastic collector of old stories that he taped with an old system of magnetophone and things like that. I would say the oral literature that was kept in Quebec is because of him. And he was also interested in the native. He went, I think I mentioned it, when he went to the West and all that, with Oldgate, with Jackson, with all of them. And so he was a fantastic link between these two attitudes and also the two communities. Yeah? And one example of that, and you will see again why I think he makes the link, it is he succeeded to convince both Jackson and Lismer to accompany him first in the Ile d'Orléans and to make drawings on the spot, and hopefully that these guys will make painting, you know, and these paintings will be used after for many usage possible, let's say even to attract tourism, or to, at the lowest level if you want, and the highest to make a recognition of this Quebec culture that he was so enthusiastic about. So you can imagine Monsieur Barbeau, who is, of course, bilingual, getting along with these two guys and making them, oh, this is good, you should draw this. And for instance, here is l'Église Sainte-Famille. This is in Ile d'Orléans, and near Quebec. And you see where it is. And anyway, I will show you later a little map, if ever all this is. And then, if you look carefully, you will see there's some notation here and there of color. So really, this was a sketch done in 1925 with accompanying, let's say, Monsieur Barbeau, and maybe with the idea of finally making a painting. But there's no painting of Jackson who looks like this drawing. I said I should find a photo to show you a little bit which angle he took. Well, this photo is interesting because it's contemporary. It's done in 1920, but la photo is done from the back. But here you can see where he was. He was exactly here, looking at the church from the side like this, and with the facade in that direction. This is kind of an overview of Sainte-Famille. So they go there, and they work there, and they make another drawing, again with notation. Let's see, even with the rooster on the top of the spire there, you find it funny. He made it 3 or 4 times. And also a study of shadow. Put a little element, let's say, of a horse with a carriage in the foreground. But this is, again, the Église Sainte-Famille, the Church of Sainte-Famille, where that could have given birth to a painting. And you see with these little holes you see on the side, this was just a sketchbook that he accompanied. And one of the interests of Marius Barbeau himself there was to save the statue that were there. And it was a statue done by Louis Jobin, he thought at first. And Sainte-Famille, you remember this theme, I think I mentioned it in the second lecture. Okay, so you have Jesus here, you have his mother, his father, his grandmother, and his grandfather. Saint-Joachim. Alors, this is the Sainte-Famille, so c'est always all of them. And here is a drawing of Lismer of this personage that you see here with Saint-Joachim. You see, Lismer decided to make a short sketch like this. But finally, one of the aim of Marius Barbeau was to tell, let's say, the Commission Historique to save this statue because they were in wood, they were exposed all the time. And finally, of course, they went to the Museum of Quebec, where they are kept, and they were replaced by Laurent Vallière, another sculptor, more recent, let's say, that if you go there, what you will see today. Then you see Sainte-Famille in Île-d'Orléans is here. Quebec, it will be here. And so then they went by this road, they crossed again, and they went after to Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré. So in the trip, the interest, of course, of Barbeau, it's always to find the old sculpture or old usage and all that, and they just follow him. And of course, he's a fantastic introductor to things that they would not have noticed probably otherwise. And he brings them in Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré to this old man here that you see, Louis Jobin. Louis Jobin was one of the rare old sculptors that you had at the time still living with not too much success, because he will explain it himself. I will find let's see, Jackson tell the story. He says, Barbeau, Lismer, and I went across to Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré to visit Louis Jobin, the last of the wood carvers. If you want, well, it's more or less true, but certainly one of the last. He looked very patriarchal, with long hair and white beard. We found him chopping a figure of Christ out of a pine log. Barbeau introduced Lismer and me as 2 members of the group of 7. He had heard of us, he said. Il casse les vitres. The boys were breaking windows. He told us that wood carving was finished. Belgian bronzes and Italian plaster cast had put it out of business. He had worked in New York and during hard time in Montreal, where he had made most of the wooden Indian that used to stand outside the tobacco stores. You don't find them anymore, but it's true. It was a kind of sign for a tobacco store. You had an Indian outside. Out of his backyard, there was a lot of rejected works, weathering and rotting. Among them, I found an admirable angel. I wrote to M. Grieg, of the curator of the Art Gallery of Toronto, advising him the gallery could have it for $75. Greg sent a check by return mail, and Jobin was delighted not only to have money, but to be represented in an important art galleries. So the little drawing on the right show you more or less the studio of Jobin at the time. See, they are transporting a statue here. There are a few of them here. They have some of them on the roof there, and this is the 2 drawings made by Lismer of Monsieur Jobin in his studio when he says that he was working on a pine log to make a Chrysler. You see him here, and with a cross behind him. And here, Louis Jobin himself signed the drawing. Not to say that he did it, but it is to give a title. This is me. This is a representation of me. And the angel that is mentioned by Jackson is this one, who is now indeed at the AGO. And it's an angel with a lyre, with this instrument of music, and with only one wing because the other disappeared. But anyway, and it's low relief. It's not very bulky, if you want. And they were very enthusiastic. Now you know even the price they pay for it. Okay. Then they continue their trip toward, you see, they are already on, they are no more on the Ile d'Orléans, they are in Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré, so they go still toward the sea, toward east. And here, Jackson stopped in some houses. And this is, I think, wow, this is fantastic, they are getting in now. But this because of Barbeau, you understand. He speaks with people, he says, je vous amène 2 artistes connus, etc. So people say, okay, let's come. And then they are confronted with something they never seen. For instance, in each houses, you have these black cross there. What are they? They were the cross, what we used to call the cross of temperance. There was family who was pledging not to drink alcohol anymore. They did enough. We apparently in Quebec, we can have, with all the beer we drink, we can make the Niagara overflow. Well, but so there were family like this, they were pledging not to touch drink anymore, and they had these crosses, black cross were given to them, put on the wall, and of course if you start to drink again, you lose it. That was and you will find it, for instance, this drawing of Lismer's, who is incredible also, It is an interior, a French-Canadian interior, if you want. But if you look on the wall here, you have the Last Supper scene, maybe from pale imitation of Leonardo da Vinci. Here you have certainly a calendar with religious motif. And here on this little table, you have a statue of the Virgin with flowers on each side. So Lismer was struck by this accumulation, let's say, of details. And okay, this is the living room here in foreground, and in the background, what you see is the sleeping room with a big bed with poster and all that. And look, another example of this type, the same type of curiosity. It's by Kathleen Daly, who is she was the wife of Mr. Pepper, who was, these people were linked to, let's say, the Canadian group of painters. They are not with the group of 7, but they followed the group of 7. And they were very interested in Charlevoix area. And they went there every summer. They knew everybody. And finally, like Madame Daly succeeded to enter. And look, the accumulation of details here are of folkloric, I would say. You have this kind of rocking chair on which the old lady is also. This very special type of stove, on parle les poêles à deux ponts, with 2 layers. This very ugly tube that goes through the, and again, my black crust there. This is, again, a good family who doesn't drink. Bon. Puis là, on the wall, you have also religious picture. The accumulation of these details also, it's like this folkloric type of approach that I was describing before. And Charlevoix for that was really, I would say, the equivalent of Pont-Aven for Gauguin. That was a kind of a place where primitive culture was kept, if you want, for these artists. And so that's why you have many, many of them went there. Some of them, and Clarence Gagnon, decided to live there, but others were visiting every summer and were trying to take advantage of this thing. After their stay in let's say, Baie Saint-Paul, Lismer had his wife with them and his daughter, but then they were in September, and the kid have to go back to school, so the mother and the kid disappeared. So the boys, the 3, Lismer, Jackson, and Barbeau, wanted to go to l'Île aux Coudres. You know where it is. It's a little bit near Baie Saint-Paul. It's an island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River there. So they went first to les Éboulements, which it's a kind of beautiful countryside. Like you see the river at that level is very big. You can almost not see the other side. And in les Éboulements, there was a little church there that was drawn by Jackson again. But if you compare, you will see that he took a lot of freedom, and I'm not convinced by this confrontation. They don't really look alike. And maybe he decided to do it differently, or maybe it's not. He called it Les Éboulements. It's written here, and he made a mistake. It's hard to explain the discrepancy, because this photo was taken around 1930, so that means not so much time after the passage of Jackson. This, you could say also, it's a kind of, it doesn't need to be too accurate. It needs to have a typical church, that will be enough. And again, l'Église des Éboulements, you have it, it's in more precisely here. But the most touching, I think, drawings of Jackson done there is done from that sculpture that you see on the right, that apparently came from the same church, and with a representation of the Assumption. We have seen this theme before. It's the Virgin Mary who's carried to heaven, and she made this kind of beautiful gesture like this with these 2 hands. And I think Jackson have succeeded to get even more naivete of the sculpture that you see in the sculpture itself, as if he felt it more profoundly even than what we could see there. He simplified it, but he got this kind of feeling. And this, you can imagine how foreign it could be for a good Protestant like Jackson's. And not only it's Mary, but it's Mary going to heaven. This is not exactly kosher for a Protestant. Anyway, after they went to the Île aux Coudres, who is here, and they come back here to Baie Saint-Paul, And they went then finally to Saint-Hilarion. I want to show you on a map where it is. Here's the L'Île aux Coudres. Here's Baie Saint-Paul will be here somewhere. And Saint-Hilarion is inside of, it's not on the sea, it's much inside, near the mountain, where you see it here. And so there they will have, this is a photo of the place with the little church. And there you will have many pictures done from more or less a different level, both by Jackson, like here, Saint-Hilarion in 1924. He was there before. He knew this place. So again, you have the same type of system that I mentioned in the beginning. Unfortunately, I don't have a color reproduction of that. But you see the big church and then a row of houses and finally the foreground who is empty. He made also a few drawings of it with different angles and all that in his carnet. But the painter who did most of it is Lismer. Lismer did first this drawing, and then this little sketch, what we call a pochade in French. It's something that you could put in your pocket. That's what it means, a pochade. That means a small size picture that you could put in your pocket. And from that view, let's say, he succeeded to make one version that you have here, who is at Quebec now, when the foreground is very animated, and then the church occupied really the center of the picture. And one other in Kingston that probably you have seen in the reproduction, it's more famous, that is at the Agnes Etherington Center in Kingston, where not only you have the same type of structure, but you see around the spire here a kind of aura, as if even nature will adapt itself to the little church and this is a good example of, say, a kind of opposition between nature and culture, this kind of opposition between both. And then you have finally a masterpiece with this type of themes. It's paradoxical that Lismer, who have drawn little of church, have not made too much of them, has succeeded to make finally a very important picture. So I thought it was interesting to explore this type of vision of the other, even if in terms of their output in painting, it's not much. But you see, that was an effort to really a kind of dialogue between the two cultures. And blessed be a man like Barbeau who succeeded really to be the in-between. It's probably that we need more of these guys today. But he was really the man who could ally both the sentimental, if you want, or the more emotional type of approach to all these subjects, but also the more objective one of a folklorist. And he was a nationalist and a folklorist. And he was speaking English also, which helped. His education was done in Oxford and in England, so he was perfectly bilingual. And with this guide, I would say, painters who were open enough, like Jackson and Lismer, were really revealing suddenly a completely different view. So we'll finish with that today. And next time, I will speak of a much more modern painter with Jacques Urtubise, and to finish more close to our time. So thank you.